So it was the morning after the night before, a modern post-Hegelian version of the Owl of Minerva taking flight at dusk. The morning after the night before, Chaka Amuna, speaking from a television studio about the European Union referendum result, described it as being seismic in British politics. Trevor Phillips was on campus yesterday evening, and he speaks about Brexit in the same terms. The seismic shock, he says. Few have disputed Amuna's assessment of the referendum result, but many from across the political spectrum, from Polly Toynbee to Nick Clegg to Nigel Farage, have suggested that the subsequent mantra, Brexit means Brexit, is meaningless nonsense. And clearly what this phrase means for Theresa May, its originator, is that there will be no second referendum on the EU. Far from being meaningless, May's utterance in fact brings to centre stage the issue of the making of meaning through the exchanges, the twists and turns of British politics. The dialogics of democracy have been thrown into sharp relief. After 40 years, or around 40 years ago, there was a corresponding seismic change or tectonic transformation at this level, marked by the collapse of Keynesianism. Discussion developed on virtually an industrial scale to engage such themes as, inter alia, the significance of the post-industrial in modern social relations, a post-Fordist paradox, if ever there was one. And such challenges for social life itself as seismic times occur perhaps once in a generation. Certainly it's not hyperbolic to invoke Leninist language from The State and Revolution in order to speak of a most urgent problem of the day. Here is a problem which faces everyone in the British context with a stake in democracy's dialogics, namely the task of analysing Brexitism. Such analysis as fashioned in the present paper is for the sake of providing leverage in the face of shaping a future for Brexit Britain. Alistair Campbell rightly described the EU referendum before the vote itself as being like several general elections rolled into one. Following the vote, Theresa May, in her Quiet Revolution Conservative Party conference speech as Prime Minister, reflected that the referendum was about more than being in or out of the EU. A blunt instrument, if ever there was one, a referendum is rarely about what it says it's about. Hence, there is a specific logic in saying that Brexit means more than Brexit. Or to vary Voltaire, if Brexitism doesn't exist, it will have to be invented. For Brexit means Brexitism in the sense that the hegemonic formation of a post-referendum Britain is now underway, and it's something which can be captured literally in a word. New words for new times. Hegemony itself obliges us to play the game of politics vis-à-vis social change, or be rolled over by a juggernaut-like democracy. It is the aim of my life, Charles Baudelaire once said, to create a cliché. This may seem a frivolous ambition given the valuation of clichés in general, but a hackneyed phrase manifests its currency by virtue of its being hackneyed, forming a key element, a basic node in everyday life, structured not simply like a language, but as a lingua franca. The fact that he created himself as modernity's cliché shows the scale of Baudelaire's own achievement. The image is that of the flaneur stepping forth as the first modern man in a post-romantic world. A veritable flânerie of phrases appeared in the moment of Keynesian collapse mentioned just now. The very word Thatcherism is bound up with the politics of naming. The same goes for such terms as regressive modernisation and authoritarian populism. Moreover, albeit late 1970s and early 1980s in their vintage, these latter terms manifest a clear political usefulness, a specific purchase on power in today's discourse. Today, what is regressive modernisation, if not Theresa May's new government that harks back to Harold Macmillan's middle way, and at the same time as it seeks to promote a great meritocracy powered by grammar schools. Similarly, what is authoritarian populism, if not Donald Trump, the bully who speaks for others who don't have as big a mouth as he does, at the same time, ironically, as Make America Great Again, in fact means creating a new American plutocracy. So naming is indeed the name of the game, especially when the world of referendum votes, of presidential elections, this world is on the turn. There is a latter-day variation here on the theme of philosophers only interpreting the world when the point is to change it. Naming the system, along with its metonym, cognitive mapping, is an old slogan denoting a strategy of intervention in the realm of the hegemonic modalities of politics, cultural, intellectual and moral, as well as social and economic. Here, often enough, a strategic dramatisation of the issues and a theatricalisation of the debates, a performative staging of struggle works best by its economy. The question, what's in the name, is precisely a moot point in a particularly practical, concrete sense. And so the question arises of something which might be called Mayism. Isn't Theresa May's Britain a Britain of Mayism? Isn't Citizen May's Britain herself moving the Tories into Labour territory to exploit Labour splits? Isn't this a Britain of Mayism? Does Mayism work as a moniker of cognitive mapping, as cognitive mapping's creator Frederick Jameson might have intended? The answer is probably not. Why? Because May is a politician whose instincts are conditioned by that deep organic tradition of conservative thought that reaches back through Michael Oakeshott to Edmund Burke. In other words, as she herself is often quoted as saying, she is not driven by ideological fervour. She has a strong dislike of isms. turning may into an ism would correspondingly be anathema to the spirit of the government led by a politician who has entered politics simply to get things done, and on behalf of, as she now says over and over again, ordinary working class people. It's not mayism, but mayism with a question mark. By the same token, we have to look elsewhere for a form of nomenclature that provides a perspective on what is happening as events unfold rapidly in the present crisis and conjuncture of Brexit land. That conjuncture, in Gramsci's Italian sense, of favourable or unfavourable economic opportunity. Therefore, holding on to the concept of ideology, despite and because of Theresa May's antipathy to such a thing, is critically important. It's a matter of seeing beyond May's vision, of turning to advantage on the left the contradictions of her politico-economic philosophy. The bigger picture, as it might be called, arises from our engagement with ideologies, the validity of which is of the order of the unconscious in relation to consciousness, is psychological, as Antonio Gramsci would say. They organise the human masses, they establish the ground on which humans move, become conscious of their position, struggle, etc. A whole panorama of power emerges on this basis. This emergence entails our speaking a new language, itself, as such, likely to tell us things we didn't know previously. There's an ideological shuffling of the pack in that reworking of the articulated elements of meaning, themselves contradictory by nature or always mixed already, which is the historic rupture that marks the birth of a new conjuncture. Such is at once the necessity and the novelty of new words like Brexit, and even ugly new words like Brexitism. The ugliness here is a correlative of the fact that we might not like what we see, but it is all as a result of the discipline of the present. This discipline, in a quasi-academic sense, is constitutive of both the pressures and the possibilities of present-day reality. It governs, as we might say with Gramsci once again, our attending violently to things as they are, shorn of illusions associated with excessively abstracted teleology. Also, of course, it governs other impulses, such as the impulse to shape an agenda of renewal. Once it's been grasped that modern politics is hegemonic in its conception when it has to do with the will to transcend the present. And so to the matters of substance regarding this project of analysing Brexitism. Given our broad prospect, what do we see now looking out across Britain after the EU referendum result? In fact, what we see is surely one of the great Hegelian ironies of history. Many of the EU countries are simply too social democratic, according to EU critics. But ironically, Britain is now becoming like those countries in the name of Brexit. Take Theresa May's flagship economic policy. It comes from Germany and from France. That is to say, May's pledge to place workers on company boards closely resembles the German system of employee representatives sitting as of right on corporate supervisory boards. It seemed unlikely that workers will comprise 50% of these company boards, as would be the implication from the German model. But the tenor of this proposal is clear nevertheless. Britain as a nation is taking a social democratic turn in an attempt to heal the rifts of a divided nation thrown into relief by the Brexit vote. Moreover, when the Prime Minister says that change will come for her ordinary working class people, it is rhetorically significantly different to Nigel Farage's speeches about decent people with their populist ring about them. For better or worse, the tendency of Theresa May's doubling herself as both a Prime Minister and as a grammar school headmistress, how she relishes giving Boris Johnson a good telling off, is that the populist card is less likely to be played by her compared with Farage, for example. Certainly it's not that Theresa May is disingenuous, as though she were perpetrating a revenge of the Remainers, herself being a covert Romanian on vote leave. But above all, her whole language of government can do good things, should intervene in dysfunctional markets and so on, testifies to the May course shifting in a specific direction. Thus, certain steps have been taken, welcomed by the TUC, among others, at the same time as the CBI and the markets have sounded alarm, to roll back the frontiers of free market capitalism. There is even an anti-globalization dimension to the May government's aim of free trading its way out of the current economic shock. For instance, when the Prime Minister takes a delegation of small and medium-sized businesses with her on a trip to India, which she has planned for next month. This is indeed the realm of ideology, as in Althusserian terms, that of our imaginary resolutions to our real contradictions. Another case in point would be that of manufacturing. This time, there is an, as it were, a contrario logic determining, ironically, the similarities between Brexit Britain and EU nations. There will be a migration of manufacturing out of the UK into mainland Europe if government restrictions on immigration carry through. A policy of British firms hiring British workers will result in, for instance, a skills and labour shortage in engineering. A similar story plays out in relation to the NHS. Non-British citizens are in fact net contributors to the welfare system more generally. And what adds to the irony in this situation is that it's not the EU, but now the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, who is adding to the red tape involved in collecting, if not publishing, information on migrant workers in the UK, much of this information proving burdensome to those who have to provide it. The EU, what a bureaucracy. But look as well at what's being put in its place. Evidently a case of Gramscian transformism. Some things stay the same by being made to change. Or it's rather like Hotel California. You can check out any time you wish, but you can never leave. What this suggestion implies is that well, not just the economics, but the whole culture of not just Brexit, but Brexitism is taken into account. There are real gains and losses at stake in shaping the new democracy. An analytic gaze, more than sloganizing along the lines of take back control, is called for to determine the progressive paths of development in a Brexit land of liberty and equality, notwithstanding the French or 1789 resonance of liberty and equality. Of course, in conclusion, the terms of the UK's departure from the EU have yet to be negotiated. Moreover, pressure is mounting for there to be proper parliamentary involvement in the various stages of a negotiated Brexit. So really it's the beginning, initiatory phase of a project of interpreting the crisis, of analysing Brexitism, which ought to be outlined at this stage. A first move in this regard is the act of naming itself as something which then sets forth a new research programme. We can expect, I think, a further paper in this research series from Neil Ewan on Nigel Farage, albeit that Neil hasn't been able to join us this afternoon. Reflections on the B word, along with its variations in contemporary politics, are thus of the order of a performative in critical discourse. They help to bring something, critical work, intellectual labour, among other activities. The performative helps to bring these things into being. Very little thought was given to what life would be like, either in or out, after the EU referendum. Hence the SNP's view of neither a hard nor a soft, but a so-called dog's Brexit. Only now the question is considered, for example, whether or not a vote to leave the EU is a vote to leave its single market. So if the intellectual vacuum in this whole area has been palpable, there is all the more reason to start, so to speak, filling in the blanks. And literally it is a case of, so to speak, constitutive of the materiality of discourse itself. For the dialogue, which is democracy itself, a structure of strengths and weaknesses has been laid bare in the June 23rd moment. Think of the political commentators who confidently predicted before the daybreak of June 24th that Theresa May as a Remainer wouldn't be David Cameron's successor should he decide to stand down. Andrew Rawnsley of The Observer and Isabel Hardman of The Spectator, we do mean you. But if democracy in its discursive aspect sometimes gets it wrong like that, nevertheless, it's the primary resource of renewal. Brexitism is a word which strategically as well as conveniently condenses the current crisis in its diverse economic and political and ideological mode of production aspects. It serves as a form of thought focus, a specific concentration of mind thereby stabilising the pressure of analysis brought to bear on the great instabilities of the day. The true measure of practical value of this word Brexitism consists in the fact that it allows us to size up seismic times, so bring on and make public for civil society the proposals of how a negotiated Brexit is to be approached. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind attention this afternoon. Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind.